All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We're taking a look at a literal cornerstone of American literature, John Steinbeck's classic novella of Mice and Men. But we're not just doing a standard book review here. We are going to explore its surprising and honestly pretty enduring status as a highly controversial piece of literature.
So, here's a wild thought to kick things off. Why is an 80-year-old book still causing such a massive uproar? I mean, it's a very short story, set way back during the 1930s Great Depression, and yet it absolutely remains one of the most frequently banned and challenged books in American schools today. How does a story written that long ago continue to strike such a raw nerve in modern society?
Well, to figure that out, we really need to look at the actual complaints. According to documented reports by PBS, parents and censors have raised a pretty consistent list of issues over the decades. The challenges cite profanity, morbid and depressing themes, and an alleged anti-business attitude. On top of that, critics point out that the text contains language and situations that are derogatory towards African Americans, women, and the developmentally disabled. Now, our goal here isn't to take a side or endorse these viewpoints. We're just neutrally reporting the friction surrounding the text. Because by looking objectively at these challenges, we can actually get a much better understanding of the incredibly harsh world Steinbeck was attempting to portray.
Okay, part 1. Surviving the Great Depression, a bleak reality.
You know, at its core, Of Mice and Men is fundamentally about survival. It's a bleak reality where Steinbeck was chronicling the grueling, totally isolating lives of displaced migrant farm workers who were just fighting for basic survival. And Steinbeck, he knew this world intimately. He drew heavily on his own upbringing in the rural, agricultural region of Salinas, California. This drought-ravaged setting deeply inspired his writing style, which is often called social realism. He wasn't just making this stuff up, he was reflecting the harsh reality of the agricultural workers he literally saw all around him. The style is incredibly cinematic and direct too. It reads almost like a play, packed with vivid scenes and sharp dialogue that make the desperation feel entirely real and immediate.
Moving on to part 2. George, Lennie, and the Dream. Right in the middle of this desperate environment where ranch hands usually travel completely alone, Steinbeck introduces us to a rare, deeply emotional friendship between two men trying to navigate a brutal landscape together. Now, what's really interesting about this dynamic is the symbiotic bond between our two protagonists. On one side, you have George Milton. He's small, sharp, resourceful, and fiercely protective, acting almost like a parent or guardian. On the other side, there's Lennie Small, a guy who's huge, physically immense, yet extraordinarily gentle, innocent, and mentally challenged. Lennie is entirely dependent on George. They are complete opposites for sure, yet they rely on each other to stave off the crushing loneliness of a migrant worker's life. George gets companionship that keeps him from growing mean and cynical, and Lennie gets the protection he desperately needs.
And what keeps them pushing forward through the dirt and the grind? It's a shared fantasy. As Lennie absolutely loves to repeat over and over, we could live off of the fat of the land. This is their shared American dream. They dream of saving up enough money to one day own a little farm with a vegetable patch, maybe some chickens, and, most importantly for Lennie, a hutch of soft rabbits he can tend to. In a lonely, totally disconnected world, this fantasy is everything. It keeps them hopeful. It gives them a place where they'll finally belong.
All right, part 3. Power, vulnerability, and isolation.
But, as you'll see, the reality of their situation is a stark, harsh contrast to that warm little dream. Once they arrive at their new job on a ranch in Soledad, California, we are thrown into a microcosm of society completely defined by power, vulnerability, and extreme isolation. It is a place where only the strong survive, and everyone is terrified of being exposed as weak. Let's unpack how this complex dynamic plays out, specifically with Curly's wife, literally the only woman on the ranch. There are two very distinct perspectives at play here. The men on the ranch view her as a dangerous temptress, and their motivation for this misogynistic view? It's pure fear. They are terrified that even talking to her will cost them their jobs or spark a violent confrontation with her deeply jealous husband, Curly. But if you look at the novel's underlying portrayal, it shows her as a vulnerable, isolated victim. Her constant lingering around the bunkhouse isn't just some malicious temptation. She had her own dashed dreams of being in the movies, and now she's driven by a profound desperation for human connection in a place that treats her with absolutely nothing but contempt.
And this isolation, it infects everyone on the ranch. Take Candy, for instance. He's an aging, crippled handyman, desperate for a future, so he latches right onto George and Lennie's dream to try and save himself. Then there's Crooks, the black stable manager, who suffers from deep, bitter loneliness because of the extreme racial segregation on the ranch. We also have Curly, the boss's son, who masks his intense, crippling insecurity with aggressive violence, constantly picking fights with larger men just to prove his worth. And finally, Slim. Slim is the revered, self-assured mule driver. He's the only one on the ranch who doesn't feel the need to tear others down to look strong. And significantly, he is the one person who truly understands the beauty of George and Lennie's friendship.
The brutal reality of this social hierarchy is made crystal clear through Candy and his old, feeble sheepdog. When the unsentimental ranch hand Carlson insists on shooting Candy's dog simply because it's old and no longer useful, Candy later confesses to George in a truly heartbreaking moment, "I ought to have shot that dog myself, George. I shouldn't ought to have let no stranger shoot my dog."
And this brilliantly illustrates what we're talking about. Candy's dog isn't just a pet. It's a potent symbol representing the inevitable, cruel fate of the weak, old, and useless in the merciless reality of the Great Depression. The dog's death firmly establishes the predatory nature of their world. Basically, if you're no longer strong or useful, society will coldly discard you. It's a terrifying foreshadowing that just hangs heavily over the rest of the narrative.
Which brings us to Section 4, When Best Laid Plans Break. So the title of the book itself actually comes from an old Robert Burns poem, noting that the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Here we see exactly how the characters' innocent dreams are inevitably destroyed by economic and social forces, as well as human flaws, that are entirely beyond their control. Let's move ahead and see how this builds, because there is a rapid escalating sequence of tragedy stemming from Lennie's innocent but destructive mistakes. It starts before they even reach the ranch, on day 1, with the weed incident. Lennie panicked after touching a girl's soft dress, leading them to flee for their lives. By day 2, they arrive at the unforgiving environment of the ranch. On day 3, Lennie gets cornered by the aggressive Curly, panics again, and actually crushes Curly's hand in self-defense. And then, day 4, the catastrophic climax. Lennie accidentally kills his new puppy by petting it way too hard. Shortly after, in a sheer moment of panic, when Curly's wife offers to let him stroke her soft hair, he accidentally breaks her neck. The escalation is complete, and the disaster is absolute.
Fleeing back to the brush by the river, Lennie is pursued by a literal lynch mob led by a furious, vengeful Curly. George manages to find him first and has to make a devastating choice. To save Lennie from a gruesome, cruel revenge at the hands of that mob, George opts for a grim but ultimately merciful conclusion. He sits with Lennie, recites their dream of the farm and the rabbits one last time to give his friend a final moment of pure peace and imagination, and then he shoots Lennie himself. The dream dies right there with him.
Finally, Section 5, Why the Story Endures. It is just an incredibly heavy, devastating ending, right? So we have to bring this explainer full circle back to the modern classroom to answer our very first question. Why does this story endure? Why on earth do educators consistently fight to keep this controversial, frequently challenged book in their curriculum today? Well, a fantastic insight comes from Jody Scales, an English teacher at an Indiana high school who was interviewed in the PBS source material. She says, "I think when they start to read Lennie's character, they think about some of the kids with special needs in our school. They think about what could happen if they aren't protected. By confronting the sheer harshness of Steinbeck's world, the story actually builds profound, real-world empathy in students for those who are vulnerable."
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to chew on. In a world where the best-laid plans of mice and men often go awry, where economic forces, social isolation, and our own human flaws constantly threaten to crush us, how do we protect the fragile nature of hope? It's a question Steinbeck posed to the world back in 1937, and honestly, as the endurance of this remarkable novella proves, it is a question we are clearly still trying to answer today. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible piece of literature.